it's time that you knew there's someone there who's searching for you, and it's time that you believe he's gonna find you.
Why, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Two Guys Fixing the World. My name is Mark Stallard, and with me is my good friend Ryan Jans. How you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing great, Mark. I think we've bitten off a big chunk of what we did before. And if you haven't been listening to our last episode, we are tackling the Canadian Senate.
We are fixing the Canadian Senate.
Yep, we are fixing the Senate. Hopefully. So
this is what we do. We fix.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, come listen to our podcast and see what you think about our.
No. Listen and do.
Yeah.
There is
don't think.
There is no think. We know what happens then. Anyhow, because I don't want to own a $350 billion pipeline. Anyhow, that's not what this show is about. Well, not this particular episode anyway, but we are going to talk about that kind of stuff in future episodes, guaranteed. We've got so many things. We say this every time. We have like six topics out of every show. We'll do another show on that. So I think we won't end up.
One time we're going to go through what we promised. We will go through every single episode and start writing down, hey, yes, we will listen to this and we'll make a show on that and make a show on that. So, but before we get started, just remember all our information that we research, which we judiciously do, and very much go in depth for your or for your benefit, is posted on fixingtheworld.ca, where you can find links to our podcast, this podcast that you're listening to. And we are also found on the all your favorite podcastings. I do listen to our show. Someone has to critique me.
Someone has to.
Well be me.
That's what I thought you were going to say. Someone has to.
Someone has to critique me, and it might as well be me.
Indeed.
And then, but I use Google Podcasts, and I had no problem finding us. Type in Two Guys Fixing the World, and you will see our banner there.
Indeed.
So come, join, like, subscribe. Here we go with part 2 of the Canadian Senate, the Chamber of Epic Conflict.
Great title, man. Great title.
Yes. So before we do that, there was one thing that we sort of we kind of went up on in our last episode. We have found an answer to the disqualifying factors. I'm going to refresh your memory here. We talked about some of the disqualifying factors for senators, and one of them was failed to attend 2 consecutive sessions of the Senate. We were kind of at a loss as to what that was. We did some digging. Mark, you seem to got a good beat on this. Why don't you explain that to our listeners here?
Well, for sure. A session actually when between 2 elections, there it's usually about 4 or 5 years, and between one election and the next, that can be broken into many sessions, and effectively that is when the House is running. So we're looking particularly for a Parliament will have multiple sessions there, and it will be where the House is opened, usually by the Queen representative here in Canada, and when prorogation or the dissolution of Parliament happens, which is usually around a vacation time, that is a session. So it could be weeks and weeks, could be months perhaps, and so the point is, if they miss 2 sessions, which could quite easily be 3 or 4, maybe 6 months, maybe not as long as that, then you can be disqualified. Not just not missing a day or 2, but missing weeks and weeks and weeks. Imagine doing that for a real job.
Jeez. Yeah, I don't think we have to worry about minimum wage and time theft. You didn't come in 15 minutes early. It's kind of that's worries if you're a senator.
That's almost wage. That's true wage theft, I think. Right.
Yeah, and we wrote it into our Constitution. Oh, okay. So there we have epic conflict number 1, an abuse of disqualifying factors, written right into the foundation of the Senate.
Indeed.
All right. So I think what we'll end up doing is, instead of just rifling through them and coming back, I think what we'll do, Mark, I'm gonna read them out one at a time. And we're gonna
Actually,
comment
I'd like to just maybe just round the beginning of this up a little bit, because I don't think we stressed enough that the Senate, well, the MPs in the lower house, the House of Commons, is made up of elected people. That even if it's, you may argue about the soul or the heart or the veracity of the election process, they are elected. Can't really argue too much about that. But the Senate rather, they are selected by the Prime Minister, and then the Governor General puts a rubber stamp on it. So effectively, the Queen's representative actually assigns them the place in the Senate. So it's not elected, and they're there to add a final, sobering and reasonable look at legislation that is passed on by elected officials. So we got a whole group of people who are elected to do a particular job, and then you got a whole lot of people who are not elected to and then to vet what they're doing. But the people in power, the system as it stands, have put these people into that position anyway. So effectively, you've got high-level conservatives and liberals who are filling the House. So they're the ones that are in the Senate, unelected, and yeah. So this is probably one of both of our beefs. What's the plural of beef?
Yeah. So and I think you hit it right on the
Head.
on the head there. You hit the nail right on the head. You have a body of elected officials. So you may not like the fact that Justin Trudeau is our PM, but he was elected fair and square through our electoral process. You may not like it, but he was there. He got elected. He got it done. He now can pick somebody who he likes, who's going to agree with him, up to a certain amount of seats in the Senate. I can't remember how many that he can, but if there's seats that are available, he can put them in, to do a sober recount and sober recalling or rereading of a law. Now, that's going to be less important now because we're in a minority government situation. But if you have a majority government and you write some bad legislation and you fill your second reading with people who are just going to agree with you, that is the biggest and probably the most debated and the most controversial aspect of the Senate.
Yeah, I think I just want to qualify that. Of course that means what Ryan's actually means the second set of readings, because there are 3 readings in the House. Although I think you were saying that, Ryan, that it's referred to as the second reading. But just in case anyone picks up on that, yes, we know there are 3 readings in the lower house, but this is called the second reading.
Yeah, so it basically has to survive Parliament, survive the Senate, and then survive Parliament one more time. So the idea is that they're making it a little bit more difficult for laws to just get passed, which I'm okay with, but stacking the deck so that you can get a law passed that shouldn't get passed, it seems really a big problem.
For sure. I mean, that filter is, I think, absolutely necessary, because it's very. The whole idea of having the party political system being what it is quite easily for we had Harper's government and just doing some kind of awful stuff without going into any details, and was able to get lots passed at one point, right? And then you look at what's going on down south. There is when the Republicans have a majority, they pass some awful laws as well. I mean, they're not all bad. I mean, anybody that says any person or any party or any system is all bad, they're lying to you. But there's more bad than good, and more good and bad in those things. So, yeah, giving someone a majority that can just kind of go willy-nilly, and particularly we see that recently in the US with Trump's passing some laws, writing some legislation, and judge turning it down, saying no, this is illegal. So that part of it is absolutely essential. But when the people judging and when the people that are making that decision are already on your side and already going to do it, or already going to say yes, it can go through. That's a problem. That's the same thing as not having a filter. That's the same thing as not having a sanity check. It's an sanity check.
That's right. Yeah. And that is by far whenever you hear politicians talking about electoral reforms during elections or when they want to win some favor from people, that's what they're trying to tell you. Hey, we think that we should reform the Senate. Harper said that. Reform the Senate. Reform the Senate. Reform the Senate. That was like a whole thing on his electoral campaign, and he did not reform the Senate a single bit. In fact, he got to be a majority leader prime minister and realized that, hey, this ain't that bad. We really shouldn't refine this. Let's fill in a couple of seats with people who are going to agree with me, and we'll call it a day. And then it blew up in his face because of Mike Duffy, who we'll get to in a little bit. So, so by the appointment of the PM, or really the appointment of the governor general on the advice of the PM, so you essentially have a foreign government, technically the British Crown, because we're part of the Commonwealth, but and that is a major technicality at this point, is electing or appointing people to sit to reread who are hand selected by a governing body that needs to be reviewed. That is a huge conflict of interest. So
yeah.
Anywhere else, only government can get away with stuff like that. Anywhere else, that would be an instant conflict of interest. That wouldn't pass legal standing. If you okay, so let's always try and bring it down to a practical example here. If you were gonna say be like a condo corporation, right, where you got a bunch of people together, say, yeah, we're gonna pool our resources, we're gonna build this house, but instead of getting an outside firm to look at your engineered drawings, you got Jim, who is an engineer or an architect. He said, yeah, these drawings are good, even though they might not be. He's supposed to review them, but he makes a deal with you and says, hey, I want a penthouse suite, or I want the top left-hand corner because it gets a good view of the river. You say, yeah, okay, Jim, no problem. We'll give you that. That's yours. You get first pick at that. No problem. That is an exact conflict of interest. So if you have a guy who's just going to agree with you, and you put him in because he meets these ubiquitous qualifications that we went over in our last episode that are outdated and has basically zero qualifications to be even looking at law, and then you're putting him in just because he's going to agree with you, that is a conflict of interest. That's Jim who wants that riverside seat. And if you brought that, your building owners, like your authorities having jurisdiction, looked at that and said, that's conflict of interest, we want outside opinion. Oh yeah, but Jim's an architect. Yeah, but he also is a tenant of the building. Of course he's going to do it so that he gets it his way.
Yeah. No, actually, we can even take that a little bit further too. Let's not forget the Prime Minister isn't voted in. It's the Prime Minister is selected by the Queen. Right, the Queen. It just so happens that for pretty much all of history, I think, of Canadian history, it just happens to be the leader of the party that forms the government. But the Queen selects a Prime Minister who selects the Senate. That's then ratified by the Queen's representative. Well, actually, it's the Queen's representative. Yeah, sorry. The Queen does not select our Prime Minister, the Governor General does, but this is the representative anyway. So the representative selects the Prime Minister, that selects the Senate, that he themselves approves. It's kind of a little silly.
And you've basically set it up so that, hey, we're gonna we're really just going to be able to do what we want. Where, at this point, are you even considering your electorate and your constituents and what they care about? No, you can just basically say what you want and do what you want. And yes, we have had some abuse privileges. When we talk about this example of Jim the architect who's trying to weasel his way in, if you read in, we're not going to go into it in depth. A link will be on fixingtheworld.ca. The Jerwall tapes is basically the story of a senator who was originally a progressive conservative, part of the PC sort of wing of things, and was approached by the Liberal Party to join their party. And there was a bunch of provinces and this back and forth, and they went into this whole negotiation thing. And he recorded it and released it to the public. And you could just see how they were making promises. Everyone, it's all just a bunch of dirty games. So if it's a Wikipedia article, wikipedia.org/wiki, Gramont Jerwell, there's a section called the Jerwall tapes. You guys can go ahead and read into it. But
well,
yes, that was Jim.
I think the interesting part as well was that there were parts of that tape apparently that I didn't listen to them, but that were clearly edited, where it looks like bits were cut out to make the other people look even worse.
Yep. So yeah. If you're talking about a flagrant abuse of power, that's it. That's as bad as the Richard Nixon tapes that got him eventually impeached, or was the final nail in the coffin for getting him impeached. So
he, who actually resigned and then was pardoned.
Yep.
By a Democrat. Anyhow, that's yet another story.
That's U.S. politics. We'll create a what we can do. That's
U.S. politics isn't out of it if it intersects with working Canadian lives. So how's that?
Yeah, exactly. And this that just happens to parallel quite nicely.
You brought it up. I just kind of wanted to.
Yeah, different issues, but similar results. So. And finally, we're going to touch, and we'll probably spend a lot of our time on this one right now, expenses and housing scandals. And Indeed. If anybody's been paying attention to the news in the last 10 years, the name Mike Duffy, Pamela Wallin, and there's another senator who unfortunately is escaping my mind right now, all were indicted. In fact, there was a ton of senators that were called. The Auditor General, the RCMP got involved in a big investigation, Senate investigation. And basically what was happening is these senators were padding their expense reports by taking expenses that they accrued while they were living in Ottawa, while Parliament is in session, and applying them against their actual residence that they're qualified to, or they need to own for qualifications. So Mike Duffy wouldn't back down. So he said, well, fine, we'll go to court, and basically beat the system. He was acquitted. The PMO's, the main officer, the head of the PMO, his office, I can't remember his name, is Nigel something or other. Doesn't matter because he got fired for it. Basically offered him a bunch of money, which was a hush payment. So just pay your expenses and shut up. Yeah. And hopefully nobody notices. Well, everybody noticed. And there was a huge investigation. And that was the beginning of the end to the Harper administration. To see the amount of complacency and complicity of all the branches of government, from the Senate to the PMO's office to the Prime Minister himself, just wanting a problem to go away.
Yeah,
it just speaks about the absolute corruption that was happening. So, Mark, I guess you can. I've been talking for a little while. Why don't you go on, expand on that?
Yeah. Well, I think what kind of well, as I was reading this earlier, was Pamela Wallin, looking at someone who was a very successful broadcaster, and just suddenly it seemed to me, I know I wasn't paying attention. Suddenly went from just being on local television to suddenly being in a position of ridiculous power. And what did she do to deserve it? And I was actually looking to see what she actually had done to deserve it, and it looks like she didn't do a hell of a lot. She had a kind of a diplomatic role for a year or so. She worked in some academic circles, as a face, as a name, and then suddenly there she is. Oh no, and because being on boards of corporations where she's obviously making lots of money there just to being a good face there, and it's suddenly in the Senate for having done what.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that's. I mean, you got someone who's obviously on a position of. Yeah, no, it's someone who's obviously became privileged. I mean, whether or not she deserved the success she had on television, I remember on TV, and I thought she was fine. I totally had nothing against her. She seemed very nice and personable and decent TV presenter. But it's does that really warrant someone to lead the country, effectively to vet the elected governments, which is really what that is, right? So instead of having we had a daytime TV broadcaster. It's the equivalent of a game show host or a reality star now in your government. I mean, it's not that big a stretch. It's not that big a stretch to compare the two, right?
No, not at all.
Oh, actually, she was a game show host. I've forgotten. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? She hosted, so she is a game show. She was a game show host as well.
Basically a game show host.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's. We come from a position falling into these things reasonably easily. Again, I don't want to take anything away from what she has achieved in broadcasting and in other exploits, but to suddenly be selected again, what are the qualifications? The qualifications were laughable, as we discovered earlier, right, in the previous episode.
Exactly. So it just seems like if you've got enough money and enough connections, you can pony up and you get to be a senator. And so I have it up here. Hang on a sec here. So we've got Senators Patrick Bourgeau, Mike Duffy, Mike Harb, and Pamela Wallin, who we have just been talking about, were the senators who claimed travel and living expenses from the Senate. When the audit came by, most of these were found to be fraudulent or were expected to be fraudulent, found by the Superior Court of Ontario to be legitimate. Harb and Wallin repaid some expenses. Harb retired a few months later. In November, Brazeau, Duffy, and Wallin were suspended from the Senate without pay and eventually were reinstated. Duffy was the only one to face criminal charges, and he was acquitted. So when you look at that whole story, you look at a complicit PM's office, a PMO's head chief of staff who's willing to pay to basically shut this guy up, and you've got a bunch of people who are really just padding expense reports in the worst possible way. And so we talked about qualifications, and in none of these qualifications does it require you to be honest. And one would think that is just part of it, right? That's just part of you being there, but that is the most dishonest thing. There's actually 116 senators that were under investigation. So these people just got the targets painted on their back. But 116 senators were in that investigation. That's absurd. That's insane. Yeah. And these are the people we're reviewing law.
Yeah.
Like, that's not and that's the kind of thing that really, in any corporation, when you have someone appointed to a position that didn't earn it, or appointed to a position that isn't qualified for it, or is there because they know somebody who owes them a favor, or is friends with that person, or whose kids play hockey with them, or with the other kids. Whoever gets there who shouldn't be there but is there, this is the kind of thing that follows.
Yep.
And it is a real tragedy that we rely on these people to be our second reading.
Yep.
So if a law is unjust and you have people who are willing to pad expense reports and essentially screw Canadian taxpayers, do you want these people reviewing your laws? They don't have your interest at heart.
Yep.
And they're definitely not regionally representing their area. So what exactly are they doing?
Yeah, it's it's one of those crazy things where you give something to someone. I mean, actually, go back up a little bit. When you're a kid, if something was given to you, or you can see there's other kids. If you give something to a kid, they don't respect it at all. They'll treat it like it's not worth anything. But if they've worked for it, or they saved their money up to buy it, whatever it is, they look after it and they treasure it. Right? They've worked for it. It's theirs. It's something special. But you just handed it on a plate. Well, it's worth what they paid for it. Nothing. It has no value to them. And that's kind of what we're saying, is that they have no value for it. They don't see it as something that is worth holding high, or worth looking after, or worth taking care of. Why are they in it? They're in it. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. They're not in it because they choose to be. Because you can't choose to be in the Senate unless you're corrupt. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just one of those.
It seems like there's a bunch of people there that are saying, "Hey, this is some good stuff, but don't let everybody else know that we're really just padding our expenses report, and you can come on in too. Just try not to get your hand caught in the cookie jar."
Yeah, which they did, and it didn't seem to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So wonder
and that's
why.
The even more scary part.
Yeah, there is no way that all those people were being investigated, and then were arrested, and none of them were guilty. What are the odds? What are the odds of that? The odds are zero. I mean, the odds that none of them were guilty is like, no, there's no way. It's not possible. Someone was padding their expenses illegally.
Yep.
So
they absolutely were.
So that no one was convicted. Like, yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. And that is probably a very, very good reason to. Is it worth saving, or am I jumping ahead? I think I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue into our next episode, which we'll be going into. We're going to talk about reforms. Is it worth saving? It's hard to say. I mean, I'm sure you can hear the contempt in our voice that these are this is our country. This is our laws. This thing. Even Pamela Wallin came back with a speech, and that's listed on Wikipedia. If you look up that there, saying that this is an abuse of power.
Well, yeah, she was complaining that she got that she was suspended without being convicted.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. And so these people, even within there, if you're not with the right people, you get the target on your back. So, and it says 14 of these senators opted for binding arbitration.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Why was that even an option?
Yeah.
It's insane. Absolutely boggles the mind. Well, you know why? It's because they're already making six figures by being in those positions. If they're not already have multiple six figures in their bank accounts, probably nine figures or whatever. It's privileged people getting privileged positions, being paid a privileged amount of money, and then being privileged enough to get caught with their hand in the cookie jar and getting away with it. And then here's some more cookies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyhow,
so I think that's a good place to bring it into land there. So, Mark, why don't you tell all our wonderful listeners where they can find us?
For sure.
And, how they-
We can be found on all of your favorite, certainly the major podcast platforms. So you're listening to us on one of them, I'm sure. We're also available. We can also be found on Facebook on YouTube as well, where we have lots of reruns. You can see a nice static image of us on there as well. But you get all details of all the shows past, and possibly some updated or some announcements of future shows will likely be on there as well, at our websites, fixingtheworld.ca, and you can check us out there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, or whatever you crazy kids are doing these days. So with
Thanks everyone for making us a part of your day, and we will see you soon.
thank you everyone, and see you later.
He's gonna find you